Wow, that was absolutely remarkable, right? We've got more for you. Our next speaker understands the unique friendship between Israel and the U.S., as well as the very unstable region that the Jewish state calls home. Admiral James Stavridis is the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. He's a 37-year veteran of the United States Navy. He currently serves, 37-year veteran of the United States Navy. I'd say that deserves an applause, absolutely. The Admiral now serves as an operating executive with the investment firm, the Carlyle Group. And he previously served as the Dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome to the stage Admiral James Stavridis.
Hi, Ebony. Great to see you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much for being with us, Admiral. Now, over the course of your extraordinary career, and like I said, including those 37 years you served in these United States Navy, that's impressive to say the least. You've interacted with military leaders and political officials all across the world. Yet there seems to be something very special about the state of Israel, specifically its people, its values, and the IDF, which I know resonated with you particularly. What do you see especially significant about the U.S.-Israel relationship and the threats that we face together?
Well, I'll begin by simply saying thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to come back to AIPAC for a fourth year. I feel, as I have mentioned before, I went to Israel for the first time, Ebony, in 1979, young officer on an aircraft carrier, pulled into Haifa and drove all around that extraordinary state. It got into my blood. And I'm Greek-American, I'm not Jewish-American, but I feel like the Greek-Jewish connection is a strong one. Thank you. And in fact, I spent, over the course of my long career in the Navy, many deployments and operations with the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, including my last 4 years in uniform when I was the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. One of my jobs was the U.S.-Israeli military-to-military connection. So I would go frequently to Israel. And I was also very inspired at that point by the president, Shimon Peres, who was an extraordinary figure. And every time I'd go and visit with him, he would quiz me about, Admiral, what books are you reading right now? And I would tell him a couple of books, and invariably, this is a man in his late 80s at that point, he would have read all the books that I had read, and then he would quiz me on the books, one after another. You know, what did you think of the 4th chapter of Kissinger's On China book?
Wow.
My career has really been intertwined with this marvelous, marvelous state.
Absolutely. Now, near the end of your military service, you were the most senior American officer in Europe. Therefore, you had operational jurisdiction over our military relationships with Israel. To the extent you can tell us, can you give us a little flavor as to what that alliance was like? What our troops and the IDF troops, and what did they train together, plan together? Tell us a bit about it.
We worked together seamlessly, and in those years, I worked with two extraordinary chiefs of defense of Israel, Gabi Ashkenazi first, and then General Benny Gantz. I often wonder whatever happened to General Gantz. It was a very deeply personal relationship with both of those officers. We deployed our troops, we the United States, to Israel frequently. And Ebony, we worked on 3 key things together. One is intelligence sharing. The United States has no finer intelligence partner than the State of Israel. No finer. Number 2, in the shadow war that goes on between Iran and Israel, cyber and cybersecurity is an enormous force. And so the Israeli cyber forces and ours were able to work incredibly well together. And then thirdly, missile defense. As we all know, Israel faces a great threat of missile attacks, particularly from Hezbollah to the north. We worked very closely on developing missile defense systems, Iron Dome, Arrow, and others. And I must say, we, the United States, got more out of it than we gave in terms of cooperation. The Israelis are extraordinary in all three of those dimensions.
I am so glad that you brought that up, Admiral. I was blessed to visit Israel back in 2016.
Right.
And I have to say, before my visit, I was quite ignorant as to the nature of the relationship and the capacity in which you just spoke about. So for me, it was such an amazing opportunity to see that shared intelligence, to see just the things you were talking about, and to feel, frankly, comforted by the fact that our friends in Israel are so uniquely positioned,
Yes.
right? Like singularly positioned, I would almost say,
Yes.
to provide the intelligence and cooperation that they do around that stuff. Which leads me to my next question. How would you respond to critics that say that the U.S.-Israel relationship is one-sided and that the U.S. doesn't get anything from it?
That is so wrong. And I'll give you three major aspects. And the first one is the most important. It's the values that we share together. Whenever you think about creating an alliance in the world, you want to look at shared value sets: democracy, liberty, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, gender equality, racial equality. Look, we all execute them imperfectly, but it is a relationship based on values that goes both ways. Secondly, geography. Israel is located in a crucial strategic center of operations for the United States, and the privilege of being able to operate with the IDF and to take advantage of that is enormous. And thirdly, as I alluded to a moment ago, the technological capability in Israel, in the military dimension, in cyber, in unmanned vehicles, in maritime special forces, above all, in missile defense, that is information coming back to us along with the intelligence. It is anything but a one-way street. In fact, there are times when I think, I wonder how Israel feels about what the United States has on offer comparatively. Yeah. It is a powerful, meaningful relationship. We're lucky to have it.
Yeah, remarkable. Admiral, you served as chairman of the U.S.-Israel Security Task Force at the Jewish Institute of National Security of America. Now, last year, the task force issued a report that highlighted several key areas to grow the U.S.-Israel security partnership in light of threats that are facing both the U.S. and Israel. Can you share a few of the highlights from the report? That'd be great. And also how the partnership can even grow.
I certainly can. First of all, it's about resources. So that is the commitment the United States has made, about $3 billion a year, mostly monies that go to purchase U.S. systems, by the way, so good for both nations, but it's resources, and it's also the ordnance and the war reserve material, the precision-guided missiles, all the other implements of combat that are stored there. So it's resources. Number two, it's alliance systems, and you heard a moment ago from Dr. Skinner about how we want to encourage Israeli work with the Sunni Arab states, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, to stand up to Iran, creating those kind of alliance systems. And thirdly, Eboni, it's the technology that I alluded to a moment ago, cyber, unmanned missile defense. The report goes into all of those. We did it with the JINSA, and I'm very proud of the work in that report. We briefed it to Congress, briefed it to the Department of Defense. I think it's helping move the needle on the defense of Israel.
Incredible, important. Now, in the last decade, we spoke about this a bit earlier, just a complete expansion of Iran's aggressiveness in the region. We see it in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. How can the U.S. effectively push back against Iran in the region? It seems overwhelming, but I know there's a way we can do it. What are your recommendations?
The first thing we need to do is change the way we think about Iran, because too many Americans view it as kind of a mid-sized country, a long way away. Why do we really care? Iran views itself as an imperial power. When they look at the Middle East, they see the Persian Empire, which at its greatest extent 2,500 years ago controlled an enormous stretch of territory from India to the Mediterranean Sea. We need to understand the danger of that Iranian self-view as an imperial power. Secondly, I mentioned it earlier, creating coalitions. We don't want to deploy 200,000 troops and go fight Iran, but we can leverage with our allies, partners, and friends, Sunni Arabs, NATO, and of course, Israel, the centerpiece in that coalition. Thirdly, better cyber to get inside Iranian defenses. Fourthly, better intelligence collection, partnered with Israel. Fifthly, better missile defense, because if the Iranians don't believe they can successfully attack, the chances of them doing so are far less. And then finally, Eboni, we need more exercises, training, and working together. One of the recommendations in our report was to have U.S. Navy warships, Arleigh Burke Aegis destroyers, stationed in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, operating permanently out of Israel. Those would be some lucky crews to be on those ships, let me tell you.
Fantastic. And just to follow up on that, when we look at Syria,
Yeah.
I mean, it seems to be particularly vulnerable to the work of Iran. Any specific things we should do there?
Indeed. Back to the Iranian self-view, Eboni, they see themselves as creating a kind of a crescent along the north that runs from Tehran through Baghdad, through to Damascus, to the Mediterranean Sea. They want to control that region, and it's part of their plan to consolidate an offensive posture against Israel. They will link Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Quds force coming out of Iran. That ought to be deeply concerning to the United States because it threatens our best partner in the region, and that is Israel.
Absolutely. Finally, I want to turn for a minute to Gaza.
Sure.
Hamas is essentially using humans as shields, and it becomes very difficult from almost an international narrative perspective to handle that, just to be candid around it. What is Israel to do in terms of keeping itself safe, preserving everything that is so valuable that it offers to the world and certainly to the United States in light of what Hezbollah and everything is doing in the Gaza area?
Indeed. When I was the dean at the Fletcher School, every year we would invite the IDF Judge Advocate Corps, their lawyers, if you will, to come and present to our students. And we did that because we wanted to make the point how seriously the IDF takes human rights and how they do everything they can to avoid collateral damage. So the first thing we need to do is hold on to our values, minimize collateral damage, do all that we can to avoid killing anybody, human shield, innocent civilian bystander, and kill the actual terrorists. But we've got to tell that story about how we follow our values. So number one is values. Number two is intelligence, knowing where these perpetrators are operating and breaking their ability to recruit and proselytize and move people forward. Number three is technical means. What are the non-lethal kinds of weapon systems we can use? Sound, water, gas. What are the kind of things we can use that incapacitate without killing? And fourth and finally, we have to tell this story coherently about what is actually happening, because by doing that, we own the strategic narrative. That is crucial as well. And I am very confident, Eboni, that our shared values, reducing collateral damage, doing all that we can, are the right ones. It's the right military approach. It's also the right approach for our values. And that's why these two nations stand together. Thank you.
I have to thank you specifically, Admiral, for such pointed and detailed and truly actionable pieces of insight around very complicated, almost overwhelming issues. But I think I speak for many of us in this room that what you offered us here today makes us feel more optimistic and more empowered as we face the challenges ahead. Thank you, Admiral James.
Thank you very much. What a pleasure. Thank you. Eboni, thank you very much.
Thank
what
you
a
so
real
much.
pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your time, your attention. I know it's the post-lunch kind of afternoon lag is approaching, but you all were fantastic. I want to thank you and enjoy the rest of your conference.